gases can affect the atmosphere and then
Weather is the state of the atmosphere at a place and time as regards to heat, dryness, rain, wind, and sunshine. On the other hand, climate is the pattern of weather over a long period of time. Due to the climate changing, the Earth is warming by 1 degree, causing many catastrophic disasters like floods and our glaciers melting.
Look at this nice juicy burger. Delicious, right? Couldn't do any wrong to our society. But that's where you can be wrong. Industrial agriculture have a huge carbon footprint. U.S. food systems contribute to nearly 20% of the nation's carbon dioxide emissions. Manufacture and use of pesticides and fertilizers, fuel and oil for tractors, equipment, tracking and shipping, electricity for lighting, cooling, and heating contribute to make the carbon footprint huge. But that's not the only thing. Livestock is responsible for 12% of planet warming greenhouse gas. Livestock produces methane, which is a greenhouse gas during their food digestion process. Also, the average person eats 176 pounds of meat every year. Now, many people think the Earth temperature raising 1 degree would not be that bad, but it could actually cause a lot of problems for our Earth, such as sea levels rising, which are called flooding of major cities, just to name an example.
This is our project on the carbon footprint. A carbon footprint is the amount of carbon dioxide and other carbon compounds emitted due to the consumption of fossil fuels by a particular person or group. In this project, we divided all the sections where we believe we use the most carbon. And this was my carbon footprint, and Joe's, and Bernard's. And most of us found that housing was our largest portion.
And why do you believe that, Shelly?
Because we use electricity, natural gas, and other things that raise the carbon level. So the multiple ways to reduce would be to turn off lights when you leave the room, drive a fuel-efficient vehicle, insulate and seal your home, add solar panels, turn off the water, reuse and recycle, and minimize purchases of new clothing.
Thank you for your time, Shelly.
On this project, we did the sea level rise, where we had 2 buckets with ice and water, and we did this to show what the ice in the glaciers does to the water in the ocean. So in one bucket, we had a bowl that was supposed to represent land ice, and we were showing how it melts into the ocean. Our hypothesis was that the floating ice would have a higher height than the land ice. But after this experiment, we learned that the land ice actually had a higher height than the floating ice by 0.01 millimeters.
Thank you. Okay, and this here is our carbon dioxide in our Earth's atmosphere experiment. In this graph, it shows, well, first let me explain the experiment. The experiment were 2 bottles. They were both covered with Play-Doh at the top to represent the atmosphere, and we put a thermometer in to test the temperature. But in one, we put Alka-Seltzer in to represent carbon dioxide, and this is the one without the Alka-Seltzer. The temperature stayed pretty constant throughout the whole time, throughout the whole experiment. But on the other hand, the one with the Alka-Seltzer to represent CO2, the temperature spiked, dropped, and then went right back up. And together, you can see how much the one with CO2 changed compared to the one without the Alka-Seltzer in there representing the CO2. And what does this experiment represent? It represents the constant growing Earth's climate. With just 1 degree, everything changes. It causes more catastrophic disasters where the environment becomes destroyed, vegetation becomes oh my God, scarce because they are burned and taken over. The crops struggle to grow in this destroyed environment. Glaciers in Australia melt and the loss of habitat make animals adapt to food, new places to live. Most organisms do not have a way to live efficiently. Okay, in this, we have 3 projects that all kind of correlate together. The first one was a dissolving egg, where we got part of an eggshell, where at first it was nice and firm, and then we constantly put it in vinegar, and then we let it sit overnight. When we got the eggshell back, it was slimy, it felt like wet paper. And what this represents is what's going on in our oceans. Seashells are being greatly damaged by this because their shells are made out of calcium, and this carbonic acid ruins it. From observation, the eggshell dissolved overnight. For yesterday, when we first got the eggshell, it was firm and hard, but today it was weak and felt like wet paper. This it shows what carbon does to change our species. That was our observation. All right, acidification. We had 2 cups with purple liquid in them, and in one it was controlled where we did nothing to it, and the other was one where we wanted to represent CO2 being put in it by blowing in it constantly for 5 minutes between 3 people. And what this did was represent how carbonic acid in our oceans decreased the pH levels, causing great harm to living organisms in our oceans due to these decreasing pH levels, while the other one just sat there unbothered. And our observation was, when we blew into one cup, it became lighter than one. We didn't blow into the other, and that was a result of the CO2 coming from us as humans, which is a representation of our oceans being thrown off by acidification.
On Tuesday, we went to the botanical gardens at U of M, where we experimented outside the many plants that are out there in this state. And during this time, we saw that because of the high heat, many plants would die because of the climate change. The leaves would turn fragile and easy to break, and they were brown, which shows that they are dead, which is not good for the organisms that feed off of it.
Thank you.
Became 2 degrees warmer. In 2015, the Paris Agreement declared that the world should try to keep Earth's warming trend to well below 2 degrees Celsius by 2100. Here's what would happen if temperatures did increase by that amount. Sea levels will likely rise by 1.6 feet, flooding coastlines worldwide. While the amount of fresh water may increase for high latitudes, East Africa, and parts of India and Sahel, subtropical regions may lose nearly 1/3 of its fresh water. Making matters worse, heat waves could intensify. Tropical regions may experience heat waves for up to 3 months, which will affect the growth of certain staple crops. These areas will likely produce less wheat and corn, but slightly more soy and rice, which could affect overall diets worldwide. Likewise, North Asia may see a boost in soy crops, growing up to 1/4 more soy each year. For sea life, the situation is more dire. Warmer oceans will do irreversible damage to 99% of coral reefs. As the reefs die off, it will disrupt ecosystems for up to 9 million different species. This scenario was forecasted by the European Geosciences Union in 2016. In 2017, another team of scientists estimated there's a 95% chance Earth will warm by more than 2 degrees Celsius by 2100. Bleak forecasts may not be enough to stop humans from warming Earth, but at least they're a guide on how to prepare for a frightening future.
global temperatures rising by more than 2 degrees, greenhouse gas emissions need to fall by 2.5% every year until they reach zero. In the UK, that means cutting our emissions by 12 million tonnes in the first year. So, what can we do? If every person in the UK planted a tree, we'd each cut carbon dioxide emissions by 2 kilograms per year. Added together, that's 128,000 tonnes of CO2. You can make a bigger difference by recycling. Every household in the UK which recycles saves 91 kilograms of carbon dioxide. If every household recycled, we'd save 2.4 million tonnes. Switching to energy-saving light bulbs saves 120 kilograms per household. That's 3.2 million tonnes of CO2 if every home in the UK followed suit. We can also help cut the energy used in the treatment of wasted water. If we all turned off the tap when brushing our teeth, we'd cut 7.9 million tonnes from the UK's emissions. None of those examples would require a huge change in lifestyle, but if we all did all of them, we'd save 13.6 million tonnes of CO2, and we'd beat our target of reducing emissions by 2.5% in the first year. Beyond that, things get a little more drastic. Giving up your car would make a huge difference. The average motorist creates 2 tonnes of CO2 per year, and there are 35 million cars on the road. If we all gave up our cars, that's 70 million tonnes. If you don't fancy that, what about giving up meat? If you went veggie, you'd save 1,241 kilograms of CO2 per year. If the whole country did it, we'd save 79 million tonnes of CO2, more than 16% of our total carbon emissions. Too drastic? Well, even giving up beef would make a big impact. Producing beef creates 5 times more greenhouse gas emissions than any other meat. So, could you give up that steak to help save the planet?